Right, guys, welcome to the CIBSE CPD seminar on future of heating in a decarbonised gas grid. I've got Pete and Adam here from Bosch presenting the CPD. Thank you for your time. So I do just want to put a few little pointers in. So if anyone who's got questions online, if you guys could turn your mics and cameras off before question time, because this is a recorded seminar and it will be going on social media. Yeah, I will let Pete introduce himself and the CPD.
Okay. We've still got feedback, or we? Yes. Has anyone got anything on?
Online's muted. Yeah, all the online is muted for some mills. There's some council mics open.
Yes. John, are you getting a feedback?
I'm going to turn off the audio in the room as well.
Yeah, is that better? Oh, that's better. It's gone. It's gone. Fantastic. All right. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Welcome to this CPD on hydrogen for heat. My name's Pete Mills. I work for Bosch. I'm a technical operations manager there. I'm involved with their hydrogen team. I'm part of the team that looks at that. I'm responsible for commercial industrial hydrogen within Bosch in the UK. And we've been very much involved in all of the government funded programs, etc., looking at the possibility of hydrogen for heat and exploring it. I'm pretty sure I don't need to explain to anybody in this room why we need to decarbonise heat and why it's such an important thing. It's a massive challenge for sure. The Committee on Climate Change estimates it's going to be costing something around £250 billion to actually do this change. Never been done before, completely unprecedented. So it's a big challenge. And I think, if we look across to see what the options are to decarbonise heat, then we've got kind of 4+ options really. We've got the all electric route, which pretty much takes us to heat pumps. We've got the heat network route, which is very important because we need to get waste heat into the system if we're going to keep our energy security to the kind of level that we want, and also hit our targets. We've got the decarbonised gas route, which we're going to talk about today. Mainly hydrogen, a little bit of biogas and other gases and things in there, but they're not really going to count so much. So if you're going to do it, it's got to be hydrogen. And then we've got hybrids. We've got a combination of doing boilers and heat pumps that might kind of be an interesting transition technology in some circumstances. And I think when you look to the likes of the off-grid sector, which is obviously much smaller, you've got things like HVO, you've got which is really a kind of drop-in replacement for kerosene. Will also be the fuel probably that potentially for aviation, and there's always been a kind of synergy between those two markets. And you've got other things like RDME, which is a kind of biogas equivalent of LPG. Again, much smaller individuals, but they're all going to be making out a part of the picture. At Bosch, we're involved in all these areas. We're a heat pump manufacturer. We're very much involved with heat networks. We're one of the only manufacturers in the UK that actually manufacture HIUs here at our factory in Worcester. We're also very much involved with the decarbonised gas route, because as I said, we've been involved in all the government funded programs, and as we are with hybrids, etc. So the point of me telling you that is that we've got skin in the game, if you like, across all of these things. We're involved in all of them, because I think at the minute it's become quite difficult at times to really have a good debate about this, because views become very polarised. There is people that are just, we must do heat pumps, this is what we must do, and there are others on the other side saying, no, we must do gas. So it becomes very difficult to have that conversation, and right at a critical time, because we need to bring the general public along with us, which we won't achieve anything if we don't have that kind of open debate out there. So, but just because these things are so polarised at the minute, I'm going to start with a statement, right, to just set the scene. And it is really that if we want to decarbonise heat, and we looked at the efficiency first principle, we thought, right, what's the most efficient way to do this? Then, hands down, the utopia is we live in very well insulated buildings, very small heat demands, that are probably met by heat pumps and a little bit of heat networks. You know, hands down, that's the most efficient way to do it. No questions about it. So you could very well say to me, all right, you know, told us what the utopia is. So why are we talking about hydrogen then? What's the point? Well, here's the problem. Here's the issue. Probably some of this you know already, but this is just really. Trouble is that the buildings we've got in the UK are very poorly performing buildings. Now we've got some of the worst buildings like in the UK. I think we're sometimes known as the coal man in Europe, really, because if you look across European countries, they've got much better standards than we have. We've got lots of old buildings, you know, built pre-war and like. And 85% probably of the buildings we're going to have come 2050 are already built. You know, sometimes we get a little bit fixated with the new build sector. Of course, that's important, but you know, if you were taking what I said earlier on, you'd be mad not to be doing new build with heat pumps, heat networks, very well insulated buildings, because that's ultimately where we need to get to. You'd be mad not to do that. But what do we do with the 85%? Well, government policy at the minute is really that we take out our gas boilers and we put the heat pump in. Generally, air source heat pumps is really the path of least resistance. You know, the easiest way to go. If you look at the figures on heat pump sales, they far outweigh anything to do with ground source. But of course, we've got to find somewhere to put them. We need some spatial arrangement. For a lot of properties, that's not going to be an issue, but for some properties, that will be a problem. You know, particularly flats and the like. And we've also got to think about noise. You know, if you look to what the NCS installers do, a lot of what they're doing through their commissioning process and when they're making assessments is really, is this heat pump going to make, you know, give us a noise problem? Now, that's getting better. Technology is improving all the time, and that is getting better, but that can still be a bit of an issue. And we've taken out our gas boiler probably in the kitchen or wherever, and sometimes we have to have another component internally. Sometimes there's a requirement for that, not for all systems, but, you know, occasionally there is. But one thing we do have to do is we've got to think about hot water. We need to get some hot water storage in there. And the problem is we probably spent, I don't know, the last 2 decades at least, maybe more, stripping out cylinders and putting combi boilers in. There's now over 17 million combi boilers installed in the UK. And so often that space has been used out, maybe it's become an ensuite or something, you know, and suddenly you've got to come back and try and find a solution for that. Now, again, you know, technology is coming along. We've got phase change materials and things like that can perhaps help in that area with a little bit of extra space, etc. But it's still something that's got to be done, still a challenge. Now, if we know anything about heat pumps, we know that they like to operate at low temperatures. No matter what we do, even if we use high temperature heat pumps, they still like to operate and are more efficient at low temperatures. And so often that means us looking at the existing radiators in the system and thinking, you know, can we use them, or do we need to upsize them on that? So there's a kind of disruption factor there, because often people are quite resistant to having bigger radiators put in and the like. And also there's some problems around pipe work as well. You know, one of the lessons that was learned from the electrification of heat study, which was a government funded study that kind of gave away 700 plus heat pumps. But one of the problems was that at the time, actually, houses built in like the 1990s were difficult because they had a lot of microbore pipe work in there. And so that was all having to be upgraded. And so, you know, further disruption, which is a hassle. And of course, we've got to control heat pumps a bit different. And we're very used to getting up in the morning, on there comes our heating, and you know, the house heats up very quickly, but we can't do that with a heat pump. We can't. We need to think about it a little bit more like a refrigerator. You know, if our fridge wasn't cold enough, we'd go there and we'd tweak it, and we'd perhaps come back the next day and it would be the right temperature. And that's a little bit how you have to think with heat pumps. And so there's a bit of behavioural change there for consumers, and that's quite difficult sometimes, quite a challenge when they've been used to avoiding the heat pumps so quickly. Now, heat pumps, as we know, are very efficient technology, but what we do know from the studies so far, and the electrification heat study was very good for this, was that the average COP, or seasonal performance factor, as they used it there, was around 280%. Sounds all right, but we know that if the spark gap, the distance between your gas and electricity, it's probably about 4. So you've got something to make up there. So to avoid having to pay more for your energy, you're probably going to have to think about insulation and actually reducing your demand to bring that down to where it is. And so all of this stuff takes a lot of thinking about, it takes a lot of planning. It's not like something you can just come in and do and overnight. And what we know about boiler changes, things for a minute, they're often distressed purchases. So down goes your boiler, you phone your plumber or whatever, and you're used to it being up and running again. Maybe in 2 or 3 days you've got things up and running, and typically it takes about a day to do that. But here we need to have a lot more planning, a lot more forethought if we're going to do this, and that's acting as a bit of a barrier, I think, at the minute. And of course, all this comes at a cost. The Committee on Climate Change estimated that the average cost of this was about 23,000. Now, that's probably quite high because most people are maybe managing to do something about 13,000. If you watch the BBC programme that was on fairly recently, then I think the install that they showed on there was 18,000 to do this type of thing. And it's a lot of money, A lot of people just cannot afford to do this type of thing. Even with the uplift in the boiler, not the name, but anyway, the boiler upgrade scheme, sorry, that's what it is, the bus, which has increased to 7,500 now. There's still a big gap there, That gap sometimes is just too big for people to bridge, so it's quite difficult. And it takes a lot more labour. I am labouring the point here, but it's about showing you what the problems are. Why are we not making good progress with heat pumps at the minute? Well, it's because of all these things. Labour-wise, probably takes, a good installer could maybe do this in perhaps 3 days, whereas they can do a boiler in 1 day. So already you've got 3 times your labour, plus there might be some additional on there if you're doing, insulation and the like. And so on the BBC, they estimated that at the current rate we're going, it's going to take 400 years to get the change done, which is obviously a massive gap. We need to do something like 67,000 heat pumps every month to get there. Currently, we are selling and installing about 50,000 heat pumps per year. There's a big gap. If we're going to hit this target of 600,000 heat pumps every year by 2028, we have got a long way to go, and we've really got to upgrade this massively. Now, what do we need to upgrade it? Well, you need the people to do it. MCS registered companies is something like about 12,000. I think the last time I looked, it might have gone up a little bit more. So there's about 12,000 companies registered to do this, and you've got to be MCS if you're going to unlock the boiler upgrades. Compare that to gas installers, we've got something like about, I think it's about 123,000, something like that. Massive difference. And the obvious thing is, right, let's move all those gas installers across to the heat pumps. Well, if you spend any time with installers, you will soon understand that there is not the appetite out there amongst a lot of them. The demographic is quite old and they are not for change. And so, all these things are a massive challenge. Now, if we had a technology that we kind of got around all that, then it's sort of interesting to look at if we didn't need to do that massive change. We've got challenges as well as we step away to look at the wider network and what we need to provide in energy terms. Now, this is a little jerky, but hopefully it's going to get there in the end. This is essentially multiple years of energy requirement for the electricity grid, which is the red line here, which you can see is fairly stable. There's not an awful lot of seasonality, really. It's a little bit of swing, but it's not a great deal. It's fairly stable. In comparison, we have these massive peaks and troughs on the gas grid. Huge seasonality, which the gas grid just copes with. When the beast from the east hit us, it would actually be off the graph. It was, I think, it was 3,800 gigawatts at certain stages, and it was reckoned at times 90% of the country's energy was coming through the gas grid because all of the CCG turbines were kicking in to bolster up the electricity grid as well. So we've got to have some kind of capacity to deal with this. You know, we've either got to shave off these peaks, or we've got to replace this buffering capacity that the gas grid gives to us with some other technology that does that, which is all cost. And we have challenges at a local level, you know, at the street level, we have similar kind of peaks and troughs that go on. We have typically, you know, these peaks in the morning when everybody gets up and they want their house warm, and then, you know, at the end of the day, they come back and they want it again, you know, these big peaks and troughs. Again, gas grid copes with it. They have all sorts of strategies like line packing and things like that, where they actually pack more gas into the local grid, and that copes with these peaks and troughs. So a lot of the district network operators on the electricity side are really still a bit unsure about what's coming on to their grid at a local level. You know, how many heat pumps, how many EVs and things like that are going to come on to my local grid. And so this again is acting as a bit of a barrier in the thing, because particularly for us on the commercial side of things, it's becoming quite a problem in certain areas to actually get the connections you want. And if you're looking to off grid and maybe you need 3-phase or something, then that can be a real challenge, and that can scupper your project before you start. So again, we've got to tackle this problem here if we are going to be able to get really forward with heat networks. Now, I want to just go back in time a little bit for a minute. Around 2013, when we had the first heat strategy documents come through from government. And it was pretty much, you know, all electric future really that document set out. And there's no question about it, it put the gas industry into a bit of a spin. Thinking, well, what's the future for the gas industry? We've got this £40 billion worth of asset that's in the ground. What are we going to do with the future? Just as a side note, if we want to switch it off, we wanted to switch it off, it would cost us around £74 billion to decommission the gas grid. That's without thinking about pensions, things like that, that people working on. So it's a massive cost if you just want to switch it on. But anyway, gas side was in a bit of a spin. You know, they're thinking about, right, what's the future of the gas grid? Could we do anything? And so the obvious thing was, could we have a decarbonised gas of some sort? And hydrogen is the most obvious way to do that. And some of the earliest projects, and this one here, H21, is still a live project. This still goes on, but this is one of the earliest ones. Was thinking about, right, could we look at a city and actually convert the gas grid across to hydrogen? And so they chose Leeds for a number of reasons, really. It's the 4th largest city in England anyway, so it's quite a big thing. It's quite sprawling, and I think the thoughts were, well, if we could tackle Leeds, we could probably do a lot of other cities. We could roll it out. So what they had in mind was to take the existing system and put in a new kind of local transmission system with hydrogen. It would take its hydrogen, and this is a controversial bit, I know, but it would take it from a steam methane reformer plant. So this is what we call blue, not where we want to be, not the best way of doing it, but kind of, you know, a pilot project to see whether you could do this. So essentially what goes on here, you take methane, you split it into hydrogen and carbon, you capture the carbon and you sequester it off into some caverns in the North Sea or decommissioned gas infrastructure out there. Now, the other thing that was useful for the Leeds area was there's some salt caverns out towards Hull, and they could use this as a kind of storage system, because if you're going to do, you know, a smaller discrete network, then you haven't got that massive buffering capacity that I was talking about earlier on that can soak up the peaks and troughs. So you need some kind of storage facility. And so that the caverns that they got there would give something like about 40 days worth of capacity. And so if something like the beast from the east hit you, you could cope with that and get over it. And it also allows the SMR plant to just kind of run through the summer, building up capacity in and away we go. So this is still a live project, like I said. It could well be that it's one of the projects considered for what's going to be known as the town trial. So we're at the state at the minute where we've got the community trials, then we're going to have the village trials, then we might have the town trial. So this could be one of those town trials. But you know, if you want to find out more about this, it's lovely videos online and stuff. There's plenty of information on there. Yeah.
What was that project called, sir?
That's what, sorry.
The name of the project?
Leeds Citygate H21.
H21.
Yeah, you just put in H21, it'll be there. So what we're talking about here essentially is a conversion. And we've got a precedent for this because there was a conversion in the 1960s and 70s across from Towns gas, as it were, said. And interestingly, Towns gas was actually had a very high hydrogen content. It's something like 50–55% hydrogen. And this is kind of almost a sort of back to the future solution here. But they converted across from Towns gas to natural gas at the time. Massive undertaking. But it has to be said that, you know, it's a simpler proposition then. The entire gas network was owned by British Gas. It was split up as it is in now. And appliances were a lot simpler. You know, it was mainly cookers and gas fires and the odd water heaters and things. There weren't many boilers and stuff like that. So it was, you know, it was a lot simpler. But it does give us a couple of useful precedents. And the first thing is that the way they did the conversion was actually district by district. Now the gas network is still set up in this way. So you can turn off certain areas, you can do a conversion in an area, and then you move on. So it's kind of a useful thing to understand. And the second thing that's quite useful is that the way they actually did the conversion was that they just came in and changed a few components on the day. So in the early days, that was burners, injectors, things like that, and they could do it on the day. And so that made the whole thing practical and doable. And it's useful for us to just kind of remember how that was done, because as I said, that gives us an idea about how you could do it if you so wanted to. One of the other things we got in their favour in the UK, because we've got one of the most extensive gas grids in the UK, probably Holland is the nearest to us, but they're still some way behind. But one of the key things that makes it quite interesting for us to look at it is that we are well into a programme of replacing all of the old iron mains, which wouldn't be suitable for hydrogen. So the yellow PE pipe you see going is suitable for hydrogen. And that programme is, I think it's around 70% complete now. So there's still a bit to do, but it's 70%. And so that gets us really from the street into the house, pretty much ready for hydrogen, other than the meters, which would have to be changed. But, you know, gas meters, like other meters, are part of a replacement cycle. So you can imagine, you know, you set up a replacement cycle ahead of doing conversion and you get the right meter in there ready for when you need it. And so that gives us a significant advantage, because if you didn't have this, you'd have all the extra cost of having to do this on top of trying to do a conversion. It'd probably, you know, be out the window. So where we are today, really, I think, you know, we know that we are going to have a hydrogen economy of some sort. The question is really how big that hydrogen economy is. We know that we're going to need it for certain areas like industry, where you need high temperatures, definitely. And if you look at the latest government hydrogen strategy, then it's already outlined that that really is the solution for industry. So you could say, well, maybe you'll have clusters of hydrogen, a bit like the cluster that's going on in the northwest INET, where you've got some industrial sites and whatnot that are going to benefit from that. But there's also other areas that would be useful for hitting your net zero targets. So shipping, for example, you know, that could be something that we need to do with hydrogen. There are some trials going on with trains, there's trials going on with aviation. And it may also be that we need to do something with heavy goods transport, potentially. You know, some of the battery technology looks a bit challenged when you get to that point. So maybe it'll come then. So the real decision is, do you just go for clusters, or do you go for a full transition of the gas grid if you're going to do it? I think at the very least, as long as it's still economically viable, there will be clusters of some sort. That seems to be, the minimum that would be done at the minute. The Committee on Climate Change recognise that you need that. You've got to do it. You're not going to achieve your 2050 targets unless you do that. So there will be some kind of hydrogen infrastructure. Now, if you're going to do a conversion, you've got to create your hydrogen. And I think this is where a lot of the controversy has been over the last year or so, really, about how much extra capacity do you need from wind turbines to do this. And you will see all sorts of information out there that leads to massive figures. Okay? And I think I'd like to say this is finally being put to bed by the recent studies that have been done, very recent. And really, this has looked at in depth of how you do this, because the thing to say with this is that there is an efficiency penalty. If you want to do hydrogen, there's an efficiency penalty. It's not as efficient as I started off with my statement at the beginning about heat pumps. That is the most efficient way to do it, no question about it. But if you can't do that in time, then utility has to be considered. Otherwise, you're never going to hit your targets. So this is the penalty. This is what it would take to do it. If you wanted to do the entire gas system it's in today, we've got something like 22 million homes connected to the gas grid. If you wanted to do the entire thing, you'd need about 80 gigawatts to do it. Well, what this particular study considered was that we are probably unlikely to do the entire UK population of gas connections. We are expecting there to be significant numbers of heat pumps. We are expecting there to be significant number of connections to heat networks. And so what this study considered was that only half of the connections that are currently connected to the gas grid would be, what we would need to do if we wanted to do a transition. And so essentially, I'm not going to talk through all these stages because it would be a bit too long, but essentially you get to a figure of 40 gigawatts is what you need. Now, that contrasts, if you see, some of the early statements on this, the figures were something like 385 gigawatts, but the incorrect figures have been used. And there are a lot of people out there that are very anti-hydrogen. So I totally get, we want to go the most efficient route. I totally get it. But, we need to stick to the right figures. Otherwise, we're not going to be informed properly what we do. So where are we with hydrogen production in the UK? Well, these are some sites that are, actively going on. The British Energy Security Strategy initially committed to 5 gigawatts of hydrogen by 2030. When the Ukraine crisis kicked off, they doubled that. They went to 10 gigawatts. So that's what they're committed to at the minute. And half of that will be electrolytic. So it will be green hydrogen, half of that. The target at the minute is to get to 2 gigawatts by 2025. So you can start to do some things. But these are early sites, and you can see the capacity is starting to build up. And we're going to need this whatever we do. Whether we decide to do a transition or not, we will need this. And there are a lot of other, there's too many for me to put on here, but I just wanted to pick this one out, which I think is very significant. But, the gas industry has got a fairly well advanced, mature program for how it would do a transition across to hydrogen if it needed. And one of the key elements of this in the early stages is this Project Union, which is really a kind of hydrogen backbone, if you like, to get hydrogen distribution across the various areas of the country, but also potentially through Bacta, which is where I live over here. It's across to Europe to hook up with their hydrogen network across there. So, some figures on here about what it's all about. But what they're really saying is that this is a kind of no regrets investment here, because we will need this come whatever, because we will need clusters, and so this is kind of good investment. So yeah, if you look up Project Union, but there are hunting of these different things going on, and there's too many for me to mention. But the point of it is, the gas industry itself is quite advanced in getting down the road with this, so that if there is a decision, it can react to it, and it can, you know, do what it needs to do. Okay, I want to come away from the network side for a minute, because the other thing we need here is we need some appliances, don't we? If we're gonna do this, we need some boilers and cookers and whatnot. And so this Hyperheat, the program we were very much involved with, the reason for Hyperheat really was to try and give government the kind of information it needed to see, was this even possible? You know, could we do this? Is it safe to do it? Can we get appliances? Can we do meters? Can we do all the stuff that we'd actually need? So this program's actually finished now. It started off sort of, it was back end of 2018, went right through COVID, you know, and still managed to keep on target amazingly. But it was split up into all these different work packages. There were things here to do with standards. So the Institute of Gas Engineers made a standard for hydrogen quality, which fell in as H1. There was BSI created a PAS 4444 as it's known, which was a certification standard so that manufacturers like yourselves could create you know, appliances certified and properly that would go on then to proper community trials, and that's, you know, the next stage. We were involved with work package 4 mainly, where we produced prototype combi boilers, system boilers. We were also involved with work package 5, which was commercial. The only company that actually demonstrated a commercial cascade of appliances for that area. And then work package 6 looked at industrial. That was mainly a desktop study. But probably the most important work package out of this whole program was work package 7, which is the safety case. And so this was done by HSL and Kiwa. There's a massive amount of work done. All of the reports and things can be read online. They're all on the Hyperheat website if you look on there. All the information about it. I'll touch on this a little bit later because we've got another slide on it. But it was a very rigorous process that they went through. So the whole idea of this was to get appliances and then first of all go to demonstrator trial, which has been done, and then ultimately go on to a community trial, and that's what's known as H100. It's happening up in Fife. Projects always have delays, and then, as I said, it went right the way through COVID. This, it will probably start around 2025, I think, if we're realistic. I think it will. But the idea is really to get good information for government, because they've committed to make a proper decision on what they're going to do with this in 2026. So that's it. That's the target. But it was a very good program. One of the best programs that I've ever been involved with. It was very well run. Everything kept on time, like I said, even through most of COVID. So this was the boiler that we produced. This was a team. This is a photograph taken a long time ago now. My colleague Tom Collins here on the left-hand side famously called this the most boring prototype ever, because he said it just looked like a boiler. But that was the purpose of Hyperheat. You know, we had to produce appliances that could just go in place of where the boiler is at the minute, or your cooker or whatever, you know. So it had a point to it. So we produced this appliance and it went out on the demonstrator trials. This is up at the Spade Adams site in Cumbria, and it's been on there for well over a year. Chugging away at hydrogen, and as you see, it looks like a boiler. There's nothing different with it. It's running on hydrogen instead of natural gas. And there's a number of these sites on. There's one up in the northeast at Highgrove, where they've got like a demonstration hydrogen home up there. We've got it running up there. So, you know, this sounds very easy. We did it. It's out there. It was done. But there were some challenges. It was challenging to do. The characteristics of hydrogen are quite different to natural gas in a number of key respects. Flame speed is quite high, so you have to really engineer out any issues around that. Flame temperature is a little bit higher, and we were a bit concerned when we started the project whether that would lead to higher emissions, particularly NOx emissions, because generally NOx emissions in boilers are related to temperature. We were a bit concerned about it. as it happens, as it turned out, which I'll tackle later on, it didn't happen to be the case. It went the other way. The other thing with hydrogen, and this is something that people fixate on, is that the calorific value is a lot lower. Yeah. And a lot of people say, well, can't get that through the gas pipe. Okay, well, you can, because what matters is Wobbe. And when you look at the different gases, Wobbe is the key factor. And Wobbe is made up of calorific value and the density. And because the density is a lot lower than hydrogen, there's a kind of cancelling out effect there. So it's this that tells us, by and large, we can get the amount of gas we need through the transmission system. Yeah, that's the key thing. But as I said, there were challenges. We've gone too far. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, we had to change the burner technology, really engineering out any light back issues, etc. That was a key thing for us. But one of the other key areas I think that took quite a bit of work is that for many years we've used what we call ionization flame rectification for sensing whether the flame's there. And you can't do that with hydrogen because the gas is quite different, or the way it behaves. So methane over here, you can see it's a very chaotic flame, and also you've got carbon in the gas. And so it's very easy to get an electric current to actually go across it, you know, consistently. But with hydrogen, you can see that the flames are a lot tighter and neater, and they're not chaotic like that. So, and of course, there's no carbon in the gas. So we cannot get that to work properly. So we had to go to a different technology. Not really a new technology. We need to go to ultraviolet detection. It's been used in the combustion industry for many years, but we had to get it down to the size that we needed in a domestic boiler. So that was quite an engineering challenge. So as I said, we've done it. The appliances are there ready. It's not to say that there's still development that will go on, because as with all appliances and things, you need to keep them going forward. But what I wanted to slightly digress a little bit for a few minutes and just look at another government-funded initiative for hydrogen. And this is HyDeploy. HyDeploy is all about blends. Yeah, it's about looking, could we do blends up to 20% in the current system as it stands? And the reason is that we need, if we're going to get a hydrogen economy going, particularly around this area, we need a market for hydrogen that's quite large, And so if you could start to blend hydrogen in with your natural gas, it's kind of natural off-taker of any hydrogen production. Those sites that you saw earlier on that have been built up, if you've got no market, the investment will go away from it. So you need to start up something. And that's the whole idea of HyDeploy, really, that it would allow big capacity of any hydrogen production to come into the grid, and it could be used. And that's a key kind of thing to break that chicken and egg cycle, really. And I've got a video on here now. Hopefully it's going to play, but it's actually showing you what happens when you've got a burner that's running on methane, and then you put 20% or 23% in this particular case, and running a little bit jerky. Maybe you're not going to say it. It's counting down.
Is there audio?
No. And you might have seen the flame just tightened up slightly. It was quite a high flame before it tightened up a little. Now, all appliances that have been certified since the mid-90s really have had to go through this test where we put like a limit gas on, and so it's equivalent to adding this up to 20% hydrogen in there. So they've all had to be certified on that already. Now, sometimes there's a bit of uncertainty amongst consumers about that. And so, we've had this, you might see on certain advertising things, this 20% blend ready. It's really to try and inform consumers, because we've had a lot of questions about it, but it is what it is.
You think that's the existing appliances, that's it right now, we're perfectly fine with it?
Yeah.
So we don't need too much of it.
No need to retrofit. Probably in the vast majority. There might be some very old appliances. There might be some industrial applications that would have to do that. But for the vast majority, you can put 20% in. And why only 20%? Well, it comes back to that ionisation problem. If you go over 20%, you start to have issues with ionisation, you have nuisance lockouts, all that type of thing.
No changes to flanges. No changes to flanges.
No changes.
Gaskets.
Yeah, it's just inject your, it'll go literally from 0 to 20%. So it's not like overnight you go to 20%. It could be anywhere between 0 and 20% on any day. It will fluctuate, but the appliances can cope with it.
That would be to develop the market for hydrogen. That would be to develop the market for the hydrogen being produced. Yeah.
That's the idea. So what does this give us? All right, let's think back to where we are now. If we wanted to do something like Leeds H21 in the future, yeah, and maybe we'll want to do other cities and things, we could decide with appliances that on the day of the conversion, we change the whole appliance. You know, we swap out a boiler and we put a new boiler. Quite time consuming. It takes a day to do a boiler, and it creates some weird effects because, you know, if you just like Leeds and everybody had a new boiler, you know, not on the same day, but within a time period, then they're not going to need another boiler probably for another 10 years. And what are those installers going to do for the rest of the time? You know, it's just not a practical thing. Now, oh, there you go. My animation did come in. It is theoretically possible that you could produce an appliance where you come in and you flick a switch and it goes from natural gas to hydrogen. Theoretically, you could do it. But this adds an awful lot of cost to the appliance, yeah? But imagine you want to do some pre-population of appliances out there, hydrogen-ready appliances, and you add a massive cost to lots of appliances that may never get, you know, adapted in or converted in their life. Doesn't make sense. So the method that kind of does make sense is to have a hydrogen-ready appliance. So this is an appliance that is really a hydrogen burning appliance, but it's converted back to work on natural gas because it's far easier to do it. And so what it does, it would essentially, you know, on the day of the conversion, the clicker's not quite working right, but I think it's coming up. You might have to come in and change a number of components. Now, I don't know exactly what that might be. I don't think it will be a burner. It may not even be a gas valve. It might be some components of a code chip or something in there that you come in and you do that within an hour or so. And so this is much like how it was done in the 1960s and 70s. You know, so that you do that conversion on the day, takes about an hour and you're up and running on hydrogen. And what this is, it gives you kind of scalability to this. Because at the minute, there is something like about 1.6, 1.7 million gas boilers sold every year in the UK. Yeah. So if you wanted to do a pre-population, let's say we got the go-ahead in 2026 or 2027 or whenever it came, yeah, maybe within about 14, 15 years, you could actually convert pretty much most of the UK across to hydrogen-ready appliances. And so you've done a kind of no regrets policy. And this is really, I think, the thing that's perhaps attractive to government is that this gives you a kind of insurance policy. Because if you don't hit your targets with heat pumps and heat networks, then you've got the policy, the possibility to do this. And depending on the volumes, you know, if we kept the volume of gas boilers to where they are now, roughly, then there is probably very little increase in the cost of the appliance. And so you know, from a consumer's point of view, the boiler that they buy today on natural gas is not going to cost a lot for hydrogen ready. Doesn't mean you've got to use it ultimately, but it gives you that insurance policy of you could come back to this and you could do something with hydrogen if you want. And that's really the key decision that government's going to make in 2026 about when they do that. So there's several consultations around this. It was part of the boiler efficiency consultation we had last year as well. There was questions in that. And yeah, at some point they've got to make a decision. So all this is good, but there's no way you can do this if the thing's not safe. You know? We have to prove the safety case. as I said to you, there was an awful lot of work done through Hyperheat. That's where the main program of things was done. What we do know at the minute is the vast majority of serious cases involving the gas grid at the moment is not actually explosions. There are some, but they're not actually, which is pretty much the thing that we kind of think about. But actually, the vast majority of issues of fatalities certainly are down to carbon monoxide. That's why we have these high-profile campaigns around carbon monoxide. Now, when you burn hydrogen, you've got no carbon in the gas, so it's impossible to get carbon monoxide. So that is a kind of massive leap forward in terms of safety. But of course, we need to know what happens when you have leaks, when you have build-up and things like that, because one of the characteristics of hydrogen is what we call the flammability limits. They're much wider than they are for natural gas. And what that means is if you get a build-up of hydrogen, it's more likely to go bang than it would do if you had a methane, because of the percentages. And this was really one of the key bits that was investigated through Hyperheat by Kiva and HSL. So they did a number of tests, including buying a coffee in Scotland somewhere and filling it with hydrogen and see what happens. But also they built this brand new. What happened?
Dense escapes.
No damage, no explosion.
No, it was okay. So they did this new build houses, to be honest, and the reason these were done because this is kind of like the worst case scenario, if you like, they're very tightly, airtight homes, and so essentially they built these places. They created all manner of different types of leakage to see how would hydrogen build up, what would happen, where does it interact with your flammability limits and things. And the conclusion they came to was essentially that if you got a good system under natural gas, you will have a good system under hydrogen. It was a bit of a surprise because the flammability limits didn't build up to what we thought, mainly because hydrogen is like the smallest molecule there is. It is very searching. It's very difficult to contain at times, and so it just found its way through any little gap. And so the way it built up was roughly equivalent to what you have with natural gas. So the conclusion of Hyperheat really was that there is no increase in the safety risk from natural gas to hydrogen, and that's where it is at the moment. Now there's a lot more work going on because we need to know what happens with the transmission system. So up in Spade Adam again, they've got this kind of little gas grid where they're taking out old elements out of the gas grid at the minute, 30-year-old valves and things like that, to see what happens when you pass hydrogen through it, what's your leakage rates, things like that. There's also a lot of work going on over in Buxton, HSL's labs there, where they're doing sort of similar tests really to find out. So there's still more work to be done here, but where we are at the minute is that the safety case, as I say, is on a balance with methane. Now, I just want to come back to something quickly I said earlier on about the concerns we had when we started our project about whether we would get higher NOx emissions, because whatever solution we have, we do not want to be impacting air quality. We don't want to be having the worst situation when it comes to that. And so we were concerned about that. But actually what we found was that when we moved to premix burner technology, and that's the kind of technology you've probably got in your combi boiler or at home, it's nothing different. But when we moved to that, then actually the NOx levels came down, and they came down significantly. Came down to about half of where we are with our ultra low NOx gas boilers, natural gas boilers at the minute. And that was a welcome surprise. It wasn't something we expected. And to be honest, we didn't really understand the science behind that in the early days, but we worked with a couple of universities to try and understand what was going on there. And it turns out it comes back to the flame speed. The flame speed is so quick that actually there is the sort of dwell time in the combustion chamber, so that really reduces your NOx emissions. So a really significant thing, because if that ended up being much higher, then that really would have scuppered things, I think. So where are we today? Well, I think we're in a phase where we're waiting for decisions, of course, but there's also a lot of backfilling going on with consultations and standards and the like, really. So we've had numerous consultations around hydrogen. I could have filled this up about 2 or 3 times, really, but I just picked out a few. This hydrogen strategy is the key one from government, really. This is where they commit to the decision in 2026. This is where they identify the industry that needs high temperatures will be using hydrogen. We have a whole low carbon hydrogen standard now, which is really for, you know, green hydrogen. Are we producing it at the right levels of carbon, and is it sustainable? So that's in place. We have very recently this kind of final consultation really on blending. You know, will we go ahead with blending or not? That was promised really that we would have it this year, that we would have this final consultation ahead of making a decision on it. I think, you know, barring some, I don't know, unforeseen thing, I think it's highly likely that that will go ahead. It's unlikely that they will do something now. We have further standards. Oh, sorry, I've gone too far. Is it? Okay, good. I've just put this in here. This is really industrial boiler, and just to say that the technologies really around the industrial side is very well developed as well. We've done numerous projects around the world with hydrogen. It's quite a developed thing, and you know that's ready to go. Really, it's not too much. Although we are literally this week we're starting a new PAS standard looking at commercial and industrial hydrogen, and to see if we need to do something different for certification, etc. That's literally just kicking off. But more importantly, the other key standards we got here, this was the one that was done back in the early days, PAS level 4. It's there for hydrogen compliance certification. In the meantime, we've had these other PAS standards come in. So we had one on metering, we've had one on materials requirements. So that's really looking at things like hydrogen brittle and that type of thing. So it's very well developed, and we got PAS 443. Looking at pipeworks, valves, and that type of thing as well. So these standards are really kind of backfilling where that void of information is at the minute, along with other standards, I guess, that IGEM and things like that are doing, because they're really looking at all of their suite of standards and saying, right, what would we need to do in here if we convert to hydrogen, and steadily going through that. So, yeah. You know, I hope that was of interest for you. I think the next few years are going to be interesting with this. I think, you know, my plea to you would just be, look, keep an open mind on this. Yeah. Take into consideration what I said at the outset. We know what the utopia is. We would love to achieve that. But can we do it? For me, personally, it comes down to how important we think our 2050 targets are. You know, we've got 27 years to hit it. If we think they're crucial, then unless we do something utterly radical with heat pumps and heat networks, we are not on track to do this. And I think, you know, I've said a number of times, this is the kind of insurance policy we should think about it like that. This is not technology for now. This is technology of the 2030s, if we're going to do it. Yeah. Anyone wants to come back in first, before we take questions, yeah?
Thank you. That was really, really good. It was really informative. Yeah, just a few other points. So CIBSE have got some more events coming up. One's going to be on the 7th of November. Barrier pipe for portable water supply in contaminated lands. 14th of November, reflection on regulations as a way of working. And on the 16th of November, water treatment masterclass for evening. There's also a quiz going on tonight. It is at the Victoria.
Yeah.
So the Victoria pub, starting at 7 o'clock, isn't it? Yeah. So you guys want to come along and network after. If you want to pass any details on, any feedback in regards to the CB and how it's delivered, you can do that at feedback@CIBSEWestMidlands.org. So yeah, I just want to thank you for that time and questions for everyone online and
John, how do you want to do this? Do you want to take any questions in the room first, or is there any questions online?
Oh, well, there are some questions, so yeah, if anybody else has got any questions, then go on.
Go on then.
I recently read there was a Commission of Infrastructure report recently.
Yes, it was. And I said, yeah.
Yeah, they were very clear
Yeah.
in there that they don't propose hydrogen peaks.
Yeah.
It was a bit of a fallacy because they didn't even mention energy efficiency on homes, but just said if you stick a heat pump in a house, you can save 60%, which sounds good. So obviously that's proposed gone in. That took 2 years to develop, right?
Yeah.
So obviously that's the government's next piece of briefing.
Yes.
So, I mean, there's a lot of this
Yeah.
going on back and forth.
But I think, you know, you picked up on some of the points. There's so many points you can challenge in that.
But
Study.
yeah, I think the main one was that it's very feasible if the government makes bold decisions, supports households and thinks long term.
Yeah.
So,
You can do anything you want. If you throw enough money at it, you can do anything you want.
Yeah.
You know? And if you've got it, it's a case of practicality. So I think, you know, what was so disappointing about that, and I think potentially damaging, because it gave the impression that there was this one single technology. What we've seen, if you looked at the likes of Germany, where government has been trying to impose single technology, there's been a real backlash on the public. And I think that's the most dangerous thing, because, you know, for us to actually achieve our targets, I personally think the key thing now is we have to bring people along with us. We have to have the debate about things. We have to really, you know, see what is acceptable and what can be done. And I think that's probably the most damaging thing about it. But yeah, I totally get it. It's been a horrible thing. But for anybody, I think, you know, for me, it's just not helping the progress of this topic.
no, it's not. But I assume the main reason behind that is that it will be very difficult for us to generate sufficient hydrogen in a sustainable way to have enough for all of the other things you've mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, in the early days, that's going to be challenging. You know, I put up on there the 40 gigawatts thing. Lots of variables around that. How many homes will we have go on that and the likes? And I think it depends on this transition of 20% blending, how much capacity you build up, and where you've got to by the 2030s when you're ready to do a switch on or start doing the transition. And, you know, don't forget, this is not going to happen overnight. If you wanted to do a conversion, you're going to do it district by district. And so there's, you know, there's time there to bring more capacity on. I think, you know, the big worry for a lot of people, and I totally get it, is that, you know, we will just end up using blue hydrogen and not green hydrogen to do this. And, you know, there's no desire, I think, for a lot of the industry to go down that route. I'm sure, you know, the bigger gas suppliers would love to do some of that to keep things going. And yeah, maybe in the very early days, that might need to happen. It might need to be some blue hydrogen because it's kind of just a transition technology. Yeah, might be one of the things we have to sacrifice to do. But I think going forward, nobody has enough time for that. Blue hydrogen. So, you know, that some of the things around it are quite dubious really in terms of its green credentials.
And there's also a purple.
Oh, there's all manner of colours and they change. I can't keep up with them. Sometimes it's pink, sometimes it's purple, and it's orange. But you're right, yeah, you know, there's hydrogen produced from like nuclear reactors and all that type of thing. So there's all sorts of ideas out there, but what will actually come to fruition is up for debate. Good.
I just asked with the energy density, because it has less energy density than other sources.
Yeah.
I guess that would mean that being a storage system just need more a higher flow rate in the network.
You don't.
Maybe bigger. What again leads to it's like a heat pump, basically.
Yeah. What it's actually leading to is currently, you know, if we look at a domestic installation, we have a maximum pressure drop between the meter and plants, 1 millibar.
Yeah.
That will shift, that will go to 1.5. Yeah, so that's already changed. There is actually this week, I saw this one, there's another piece of work being done by Keeper at the minute, looking at setting out the limits, because in the minute we typically look for like 70 to 25 millibar for a natural gas appliance, and that may change a little bit because we might have to put a bit more pressure. Yeah, but overall, yes, some pressures may increase. There will be high velocity and high flow rates go through. But as I said, the bobby is the key thing that gives us the idea that, yeah, you can basically get that through. Yeah. But I think, the key thing is that the high certainty is at the consumer end.
Yeah.
If the gas transmission system needs to upgrade a line somewhere, then it's the sort of thing they do all the time. Because it's not going to come on the cost of the consumer. They're not doing it.
Yeah. And the other one is platform. So a lot of people are scared that it,
Yeah, Hindenburg comes up all the time.
again, which adds a cost again to adopting it. So
Yeah.
how that was sort of probably any kind of something.
Well, in terms of the safety, do you mean, or what?
Yeah. So because it's flammable, I'm assuming the material that is used are really.
No,
Oh, okay.
they're not. There's one or two materials like cast iron, etc., which you would use, but that's really what that has. 442 was looking into.
Yeah.
So hydrogen bitumen, all that type of thing. Well, for the kind of pressures that we work at, particularly at the domestic level, then hydrogen bitumen is not an issue. At that very high pressures of the transmission thing, critical things, so that may be more of a problem for them. But at the consumer thing, it's not a problem. But as with any conversion, typically on the day of the conversion, there will be an assessment in case there's any cast iron thickness or something like that. They're very common, but you'd have to go through that sort of thing.
Thanks.
Any training or certification programs for us to work with hydrogen systems effectively and safely?
Depends what you mean by us. There is training being planned for installers. So if you know anything about installers, they go for their ACS assessment, basically, for different gases, different modules, things like that. So hydrogen will be like LPG is at the minute. It will be a separate module, and it will be a kind of conversion. So the initial focus on this has been done up in Fife, because that's where the next big trial is going to happen. So Fife College is getting geared up for doing this training. I can't remember when the dates are, and booked on one of those courses. One of my other colleagues has booked in. But yeah, that's where we are on that side at the minute. There isn't really any other training going on at the minute for consultants or others or designers that would be doing that. There is a certain amount of competency already within the UK on hydrogen systems for different areas other than heat. And I think some of that is kind of coming into play. I think, some of the benefit of all these standards and things being aligned will really help anybody wanting to do a kind of an early pioneer project. I think that's really where it's coming in. If you're talking about a transition, then we're talking 2030, and there's still plenty of time to do it. Where we see this topic come up at the minute is, say you want to do a pioneer project, you want to do a distillery or something in Scotland, and you've got a local supply of hydrogen, then there's a little bit of a gap there at the minute. And I think that's where, those that have got that competency are quite useful. Vice versa, sales manufacturers have got more experience with it. They're having to fill that gap at the minute, because we're still, for pioneer projects, we're still kind of operating in an area where we have to do 100% risk assessment. There is very few at the minute standards that can back that up like we do for natural gas. Now we're just getting to a stage where we will have some appliances that are fully CE certified for some of those early projects. So it's kind of, still a lot of work to be done to get into that kind of level of what we take for granted with natural gas these days. And it's really down to standards, and then from standards you can then do your training, etc. Thank you.